Emily Carter arrived at her cousin Mark's house just before dusk, the sky gray and restless like her thoughts. And from the moment she stepped inside, she felt the weight of a year she was trying to outrun. A year of quiet endings and long nights where she questioned every choice she had made. Because the divorce had not only taken her marriage, but also her sense of direction. And this visit was supposed to be simple. Short Thanksgiving stay in a familiar home in Portland where she could blend into family noise and pretend she was fine. Yet even as she smiled and hugged relatives, she felt like a guest in her own life, moving carefully, saying little, carrying her sadness like fragile glass. And after dinner, when the house grew calm and conversations faded into television, sounds and soft laughter, Emily excused herself and went down the hall toward the guest bathroom, hoping for a moment alone to breathe, to rinse the long drive from her face and steady the feeling in her chest that never quite settled. She closed the door, turned on the light, and leaned over the sink, letting the cool water run over her hands as she stared at her reflection. Noticing the tired eyes she tried to hide, the quiet strength she wasn't sure she still had, and she was so lost in thought that she didn't hear the hallway steps or the quick turn of the handle until the door opened suddenly and stopped. And in that instant, time felt sharp and loud, because standing there frozen was Lucas. Mark's son, grown now, taller than she remembered, with the same gentle eyes but a seriousness she hadn't noticed before, and for half a second neither of them moved, surprise flashing across both faces. Not fear or shock, but the kind of awkward pause that comes from two people colliding by accident in a small space. And Lucas immediately stepped back, raising his hands slightly. His voice rushed but respectful as he apologized and said he thought the bathroom was empty. And Emily quickly straightened, her heart beating faster than the moment deserved. Assuring him it was fine and that she should have locked the door. And the moment could have ended there. It's just a brief family slip that would be forgotten by morning. But something in Lucas's expression made it linger. Because instead of laughing it off and walking away, he hesitated, his eyes drifting too. The floor and then back to her face, as if he had stumbled not only into the bathroom, but into something he had been carrying for years. And Emily noticed it, the tension in his shoulders, the way he seemed older than his age, weighed down by thoughts that didn't belong to someone so young. And without knowing why, she felt a strange pull of concern. Not attraction or confusion, but recognition. The feeling you get when you see pain you understand reflected in someone else. And she told him again it was fine, that these things happen. And Lucas nodded but didn't leave right away, instead standing there with the door still open, the hallway lights spilling in like a line between them, and he asked quietly if she was doing okay. A simple question that caught her off guard because no one had asked it that directly since she arrived. And Emily almost answered with the easy lie she had practiced. But something about the way he asked, careful and sincere, made her pause. And she said she was tired from the drive, which was true but not complete. And Lucas nodded again, as if he knew there was more, but respected the boundary, and then he stepped away, closing the door gently behind him, leaving Emily alone with the sound of running water and a feeling she couldn't name. Because the surprise hadn't been the interruption itself, but the sudden reminder that she wasn't invisible, that someone had noticed the cracks she tried to smooth over. And she finished washing her face, turned off the light, returned to the quiet guest room where she lay awake listening to the house settle, replaying the moment not because it was dramatic, but because it felt like the start of something unresolved. A thread pulled loose, and she wondered why that brief encounter had shaken her more than expected. Why Lucas's apology had sounded heavier than necessary. Why his question had felt like an opening she wasn't sure she wanted. And as the night deepened and sleep stayed far away, Emily sensed that this visit was not going to be the quiet escape she had planned, because sometimes the smallest accidents open doors to truths long ignored. And even though nothing improper had happened, nothing crossed, nothing said aloud, the air itself felt charged with the promise that something buried in the past was about to surface. And Emily, staring into the dark, realized that the knock she hadn't expected was only the beginning. Asterisk morning came too quickly for Emily Carter, and sleep had done little to ease the restlessness she carried as she moved quietly through the guest room, dressed, and stepped into the hallway where the house smelled of coffee and toast. A normal family morning that felt unreal after the long night of thinking. And as she entered the kitchen, she found Lucas, already there, standing by the window with a mug in his hands, his posture tense, like someone bracing for a difficult talk. And the moment their eyes met, she knew the accident from the night before had not faded for him either. Because instead of greeting her casually, he took a breath and spoke with urgency, apologizing again and asking if they could talk for a minute. And Emily agreed without knowing why, following him to the small breakfast table while the rest of the house slept, and there, in the quiet space between clinking cups and distant traffic, Lucas finally said what he had clearly rehearsed all night, telling her he had not meant to catch her off guard, but that seeing her had stirred something he could no longer keep to himself. And Emily felt a tightening in her chest. Not fear, but anticipation, because she sensed this was not about the bathroom at all. And Lucas explained that he had wanted to speak to her for years, ever since he was a teenager and she was still married, when he overheard conversations he was never meant to hear. Arguments whispered late at night, phone calls that ended too fast, and while adults assumed he was distracted or unaware, he listened, confused and worried, slowly realizing that something in her marriage was deeply wrong. And as he spoke, his voice remained steady, but his eyes betrayed the weight he had carried. Because he admitted that he knew her husband had been hiding things, not just small mistakes, but patterns that hinted at dishonesty and distance. And Emily felt the room tilt as memories rushed back. Sudden business trips, cold silences, promises that never settled her doubts. And she realized with a dull ache that the signs had been there all along, seen even by a young man who had no power to change them. And Lucas told her he wanted to speak up back then, but felt trapped between loyalty and fear, unsure if he would be believed or blamed. And as the years passed and her marriage ended, the guilt stayed with him, growing heavier every time he saw her smile through pain. And Emily listened without interrupting, her hands folded tightly, her mind racing as she processed not just the information, but the kindness behind it, because Lucas was not confessing. For his own relief alone, he was offering her truth, and when he finished, silence filled the kitchen, thick but calm, and Emily finally spoke, telling him he had nothing to apologize for.
Okay.
That he had been young and caught in something far bigger than himself. And though her voice trembled, she meant it, because anger felt pointless compared to the clarity settling over her. And Lucas looked relieved yet uncertain, as if waiting for judgment that never came. And Emily surprised herself by asking questions, simple ones about timing and moments she remembered differently now. And Lucas answered honestly, without exaggeration, careful not to paint anyone as a villain, only describing what he saw and felt. And with every word, Emily felt pieces of her past shift into place, painful but grounding, because understanding, even late, had a way of freeing her from self-blame. And when footsteps echoed in the hallway, they both fell quiet. It's a private moment, ending as family life resumed, but something between them had changed, not into something inappropriate or confused, but into a quiet bond built on trust and shared truth. And throughout the day, as relatives laughed and prepared food and talked about plans, Emily carried a new awareness, realizing the surprise she experienced the night before was not about chance or embarrassment, but about timing. Because if that moment had not happened, she might have left again without ever knowing what Lucas had held inside. And later that afternoon, they spoke briefly again on the back porch, not revisiting details, but acknowledging the shift. Lucas telling her he hoped the truth helped rather than hurt, and Emily answering that it did both. But that pain with understanding was better than silence. And as the sun dipped and shadows stretched across the yard, Emily felt something loosen inside her, sensed that the past no longer owned her completely. And she knew that whatever came next in her life would be shaped not by what she lost, but by what she finally understood. And though the conversation had ended, its impact followed her quietly, steady and real, setting the stage for a choice she had not yet realized she was about to make. Emily Carter felt the weight of everything Lucas had just shared pressing on her chest, the kind of heaviness that made the room feel smaller. And as she sat at the kitchen table, staring at her coffee that had gone cold, she realized the truth he revealed was more than a confession. It was a mirror of the life she had lived blindfolded for years. Puzzle finally showing its pieces, and she could see now how the arguments, the sudden silences, and the carefully hidden moments of tension were not just random, they were signs she had ignored or dismissed because she wanted to believe in normalcy. And Lucas, so much younger yet so aware, had observed them with clarity, carrying a burden she had never known he bore. And listening to him, Emily felt a mix of sorrow, relief, and a strange gratitude, because someone had finally been honest with her when no one else would. And she realized that even though her divorce had been inevitable, the loneliness that followed was not complete, because truth, even delivered late, had a way of easing pain. And she asked him questions, carefully, wanting to understand how he had processed what he saw, how he had chosen not to act. And Lucas explained with measured words, describing nights when he had overheard conversations about her husband's dishonesty, moments that made him feel helpless and small. And though he had been a child then, the weight of that knowledge had shaped his adolescence, teaching him caution, discretion, and empathy beyond his years. And Emily listened, sometimes nodding, sometimes just holding her hands together. The silence between their words, heavy but safe, because no judgment was passed, no blame pointed. Only honesty and acknowledgement of shared pain. And as the hours passed, the quiet of the house allowed the conversation to deepen. And Lucas described how he had struggled with whether to tell anyone, fearing disbelief and family discord. And Emily recognized the careful restraint of someone who had grown up too fast, carrying other people's secrets as if they were his own. And in that moment, she realized that the bathroom surprise from the night before was not accidental. That timing had brought them together to speak in a way that years of casual interaction had not. It's because the accident had created a private moment, safe from interruption, where truths could surface without defense or distraction. And Emily felt a strange tenderness toward him, not romantic, but profound empathy, understanding the courage it took to finally speak. And she shared pieces of her own experience, too. The isolation, the heartbreak, the gradual unraveling of trust. And Lucas listened quietly, sorbing her words with the same care, the same weight. And in that exchange, something shifted. A mutual recognition of resilience, of humanity, of lessons learned too late but still valuable. And Emily noticed for the first time how much she had underestimated him, how sharp his perception had been, and how much it mirrored what she had missed. And when he finished, she felt tears rise, not of anger, not of regret for the past alone, but of relief, because finally she was heard, understood, and validated. And it was more powerful than she had expected. the emotional release connecting them in a way that required no romance, no scandal, just honesty, compassion, and shared history. And as she wiped her face and looked up, she saw Lucas's own eyes softening, the tension easing from his shoulders. And she knew that he had been carrying the weight of the unspoken for years. And speaking it aloud had unburdened him just as much as it had allowed her to heal. And in that moment, Emily realized that some of life's most profound truths arrive in small, quiet encounters, that timing matters more than effort sometimes, and that trust, even delayed, could reset the balance of past mistakes. And as the morning faded into afternoon, she felt a strange clarity, a steadiness in her chest, knowing that she could leave this house not just with family warmth, but with a renewed sense of understanding and a fresh perspective on her own life. And she knew that the next steps, whatever they might be, would be guided not by fear or heartbreak, but by the lessons of truth, courage, the gentle power of someone finally speaking what had long been waiting in the shadows. And as she stood to stretch, Lucas gave a small smile, acknowledging silently that the hardest part had been done, that confessions were spoken and received, and that in the unlikeliest of moments, a bathroom surprise had opened the door to a conversation that neither of them would forget, shaping the way Emily saw herself, her family, and the possibilities of moving forward with honesty and quiet strength. Emily Carter woke early on her last morning at her cousin's house, the soft light of dawn spilling through the curtains and catching the dust in gentle rays. And as she stood in the quiet of the guest room, she felt the strange mix of relief and melancholy that comes at the end of a visit, knowing that the time here had changed her more than she expected, 'cause the conversations with Lucas had uncovered truths she had avoided for years, truths about her past, her marriage, and the small signs she had ignored. And she realized that the bathroom moment that had startled her initially was not just an accident, but the key to the clarity she now carried. A trigger that had allowed honesty to surface in a way casual interactions never could. And with a soft sigh, she walked down the hall to the bathroom one last time, pausing outside the door to gather her thoughts, reflecting on how small, unexpected moments often carried the weight of life's biggest revelations. And as she washed her face, the running water seemed to carry away not just fatigue, but the lingering tension of past regrets, leaving behind a calm she had not felt in years, because she now understood that knowing the truth, even late, was more liberating than any comfort she had sought in ignorance. And she remembered Lucas's words from the night before, the careful way he had described what he had seen, the responsibility he had felt, and the courage it had taken to finally speak. And it struck her how much timing and circumstance had shaped the outcome, that a simple accident could become a catalyst for understanding. And she thought about how easily life could have passed without this moment, leaving wounds unhealed and lessons unlearned. And as she dried her face, she realized that the sense of closure she felt was not about forgiveness alone, but about recognition, the acknowledgement of all that had been hidden, and the way empathy and honesty had bridged a gap that years of silence could not. And when she stepped back into the hallway, Lucas appeared quietly, holding a folded note with a hesitant smile, and Emily took it from him with curiosity. Sensing the gravity in its simple gesture and opening it, she read the words, "You deserved better. I'm glad you finally know the truth." The note carried no apology, no blame, only the quiet validation she had longed for. And she felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the past hurt, but everything to do with being seen and understood. Offering a small, grateful smile, and he nodded. A silent acknowledgement passing between them, the kind of communication that required no elaborate speeches, because shared understanding can be more powerful than words. And as she packed her bags later, The house hummed with normal activity, voices echoing from the kitchen, footsteps on the stairs. Yet Emily moved through it differently now, carrying a calm confidence shaped by the truths revealed, knowing that she could face the future without the burden of uncertainty or missed signs. And in the car, driving through familiar Oregon streets, she reflected on the journey of the last 2 days. How a brief surprise in a bathroom had led to revelations that shifted her perspective. The way Lucas's careful honesty had bridged years of ignorance and given her clarity. And she realized that healing often comes not from dramatic gestures, but from small, sincere actions. Moments that require courage and timing, and that even family connections can carry lessons when handled with care, empathy, and patience. And as the miles rolled beneath the wheels, Emily felt a renewed sense of agency in her life, a readiness to rebuild not only her routines, but her trust in herself and others, to approach relationships with openness and clarity, and to cherish moments of truth whenever they arise. 'Cause the smallest, most unexpected moments, like a surprise in a bathroom, can sometimes unlock understanding that changes everything. And in that realization, she smiled softly, feeling both the weight of the past and the lightness of newfound awareness, knowing that life, unpredictable as it was, had offered her a rare gift. The chance to see clearly, to acknowledge what had been hidden, and to move forward with both wisdom and grace. Carrying the quiet bond she now shared with Lucas, a connection forged not in scandal or drama, but in honesty, courage, and the profound simplicity of being truly understood.